basket you're going to put in the Nile River. Okay, so it's more of that. And then cubit. A distance from the elbow to the tip of the fingers, ranging from about 18 to 21 inches. So the taller the person, of course, the longer the cubit could be, but that's the general area. Apparently, there was something called a royal cubit. What we would have as 20.4 inches was a standard measurement. Now, which one did Noah use? Probably his arm would be my guess. Whatever that was, that's probably what he used. And so we have a good idea of what this vessel would be. All right, now, cubits. All right, and if you're going to fill in on your paper, you could do this. Cubits equals 300 cubits equals 510 feet. You can fill that in if that's there on your paper. The width, the cubits, that equals 85 feet. Okay? And the height equals 51 feet. That would be the dimensions of the ark. Okay? That's what the general dimensions would be. Now, it's still hard for us to comprehend. They think maybe it could be in the range of, I think the model we're going to see is about 450 feet in length and about 50 feet wide, about 50 feet wide, 30 feet tall. That's about what they're going to look to. So in other words, that's what the standard kind of stuff would be. Now, we've already read Genesis 6:17 through 22. Now, one of the other things I wanted to mention to you here, the fowl is the word oof, or something like that. Hebrew word referring to anything that flies, winged creatures. Is there anything that flies that is not a fowl? A bat? Now, birds are fowls, so all those things would be included. So it's not just the idea of feathered fowls. It's anything that flies, because that's used, and we know that from other passages of Scripture, and this one we'll get to next week. So this is all of the PowerPoint we're going to be looking to tonight. Now, as we look through this, I want to kind of remind you of a couple of things. The size of the ark. When you see descriptions of the ark, we've already talked about that, cartoony or something like that, or we see it where it's just a big cube floating. There's issues with both of those things that'll be addressed in the video. All right, and so in here, who provided the construction plans for the ark? God did. All right. Now, from what may be unknown to you and me that God may have left out of the record on purpose, it was crystal clear to Noah. You ever thought about that? There's some things that I think that we don't quite grasp. We have everything that we need to know, but if you talk about time and place and background and culture, society, there's some things that I think that we have to kind of work through, and we have to do our best to understand what was the ark. By the way, who built the ark? Yeah, Noah. What was it made of? What was the building material? Gopher wood, all right? And then what was used to cover the ark inside and out? We don't know if pitch was something that was, you went and harvested some sort of plant, you boiled it down, you made pitch, or if it was a mineral. We don't know what it was, but it was some sort of pitch. Why would pitch be needed? To do what? Water seal, all right? And so you couldn't get a spray can or put tape around it, all right? So then the dimensions of the ark, 30 by 50 by 30, all cubits, all right? And then were there to be doors and windows in the ark? Yeah, there's a door to get in, there's a window, and again, there was these things, and sometimes I think we have to know, our Bible says window. The idea would be, in verse 16, it could be roof, could be the use of it in other Hebrew passages. But anyhow, some sort of a roof on this thing, and obviously an access hole, because the doves went out, right? So that would be an access point there. And what other features of the ark does the text mentioned? What was going to be in the ark? Animals, okay. But let's talk about the structure.
Structure with the levels.
Levels. There's at least 2 stories are mentioned, specifically 3rd story. All right. What else? It talks about in there, it talks about rooms. Another word that is used also for rooms with the same Hebrew word is nests. So some fowls, I mean, a fowl doesn't need a room this size. You can put lots of birds, okay, in nests, okay? That all could be done. Now, with that in mind, again, this is going to be, it's divided into 3 stories. So as we think about all of this, Tebah is used in reference to Noah's Ark. There's this small reed basket. We've talked about all that. So again, we're kind of making some very educated guesses with what all this is. And so we have the cubit. So anywhere from 18 to 21 inches, roughly, from here to the tip of the finger. And then if you have a hand's breadth, it would be whatever this would look like. So a cubit plus a hand's breadth, that's what it would be. Okay? How many of you have ever tried to measure? Okay, I'm going to go cut this over here. It's never going to be right. You're going to do something. All right, so Noah had to be a smart guy, and I'm guessing he made some sort of template in which this is the cubit. All right, boys. Dad, what's that cubit again? Come over here. Can you measure this for me? I'm tired of being called over here. Boys, come over here. We're going to make this thing. This is going to be your cubit. Don't lose this stick again. Okay, so maybe it was like that. I don't know. So anyhow, so they do all of this work, and anyhow, and then, of course, the coating, the inside and out, gopher wood, and such. We're going to talk about the animals in the ark a little bit here tonight, but I want you to ask you a few questions here. What was going to be destroyed in verse 17? Everything. The world, okay, not just like it's going to go away, but it's going to be completely changed by water. And what's going to die? Anything that breathes air that is not on the ark. Everything else is going to be gone, okay? Now, with that in mind, what was the purpose of bringing the animals on the ark according to verses 19 and 20? To do what? To save them alive, to keep them alive. That was the point. So the idea of lifeboat, life raft, and you're thinking about a raft that's got some stuff tied together with horsehair or whatever you find out in the wilderness. That's not the concept here, obviously. So, and then what 3 groups of animals are mentioned? You can look in verse 20. What 3 groups of animals are mentioned here in Genesis 6:20? Fowls, and creeping things. So all of you that don't like creeping things, this would not be the place for you. Okay? If you don't like creeping things, I have had more killings of spiders in my life. And just anyhow, so those are the 3 groups. What phrase is repeated in verse 20? It's mentioned a couple times. After their kind. Okay? Now that's important. That's very important. There is a difference, which will be dealt with in the videos. There's a difference between kind and species. There is a difference that will be delineated here in a few moments, all right? And then how many of each kind were to come into the ark? 2, and of course we know about the clean animals, but the 2 of each kind, and then a male and a female. Did Noah have to go and get the animals? No. They did not have to go get the animals. Animals, God built into them certain things that they just know. Okay, they know, they sense a storm or whatever else is coming. I think it was Lee that told me that whenever his dad and mom were in Africa, that they would hear about these army ants coming through, and a lot of animals, I mean, it's just ants. Yeah, they would vacate. Be gone. They have a sense about these things, but God put it in these specific animals. My opinion, these were the perfect of the kinds. Perfect. There weren't flaws at all. They were perfect. Okay? That's my opinion. We're not told that. All right, and then what does this text say about food for the voyage? What does it say about that? To gather what? See that in there? They're supposed to gather food. They're supposed to store it. Don't know if it was down in the bottom. You know, maybe it would have been. The storage bins may have been down in the hull or down in the keel, down at the bottom of the ship. And as you would trade food for fertilizer. Okay, maybe that's how that worked. I don't know. Or you threw it overboard. I don't know how any of that worked, but nevertheless, but that's what happened. There was enough food for what did Noah do with his directions? What did he do with them? He did them. He was obedient to what God had told him to do. All right, now, there's one other note I want to mention to you here before we get to our videos here tonight. The idea of oaf, O-W-P-H, oaf, all flying creatures, bats, eagles, ravens, doves, pterosaurus, and other creature that flies would be part of that. And Leviticus 11, 13 through 19 puts bats with other fowl. These would have been the kinds of creatures created on day 5. Okay? So that's what would have happened. So God was rescuing his creation, and in my opinion, they were the best of the best that was still there, of course, that God was going to salvage. Now, we're going to get out of our this part right here. We're going to go back, and of course, I went the wrong direction. Here we go, and we're going to go back here, and we're going to watch 2 video clips. Now, let me remind you, I say this every week. You've got to listen loudly. This is the speaker we have for this thing. So we're going to start with this one. This is Building the Ark, and fascinating video. And Brother Nuno, we may want to turn this center row of lights off as well. Might help us a little bit. And here we go.
Imaginary vessel. For example, when they make cargo ships, 50 by 30 would be just a typical proportion you'd see in the cross-section of a cargo ship. Gives you about the right stability, not too much, not too little. In fact, those proportions are so good that one of the naval architects that I've been working with, he actually realised that Genesis was literal because of those proportions in Genesis 6:15.
The Bible is quite specific on the ark's dimensions, but it doesn't go into detail regarding its shape. The only possible allusion to the ark's shape in the Bible would be the Hebrew word teva. Some have claimed that the definition of this word is box, but that's not necessarily true.
The word for ark in the Bible is teva, which nobody knows what it means. Teva only appears twice in the Bible. It appears for Noah's teva, and also there's the teva for Moses' baby basket.
In Hebrew vocabulary, as in any language, the meaning of a word is more and more precisely understood the more often it's used in different contexts. But when it's only mentioned a couple of times like that, we have a God anointed and approved imagination to fill in the details that are not given by the understanding of the exact word itself.
Well, it doesn't necessarily mean box, because Moses' baby basket was just a little basket.
Tim Levitt, a mechanical engineer and supervisor of the Ark exhibit at the Creation Museum near Cincinnati, began his quest to come up with a possible description of an ark design that would complement Noah's shipbuilding abilities.
What was the technology like at that time before the flood? Well, there are a couple of clues in the Bible. First of all, for long lifespans. If a person lives for centuries, they're going to be very competent. They're going to be great at a lot of different things. Also, they're very healthy. To live that long, it implies that you'd be a very healthy person, good concentration, healthy body, etc. So you're very capable and able to output a lot of work.
The Bible makes it absolutely clear that the first people in this earth were the most brilliant people. Technology, of course, had not increased to the extent it has today, but the intrinsic brilliance of man is such that even Tubal-Cain, long before the flood, was an inventor of every cutting instrument of brass and iron.
We would expect that the technology was probably a similar level to ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, China, for example, and perhaps similar to the pre-industrial revolution in Europe.
Noah, with the available technology and tools and help available to him to build this, over the 120 years that God gave him, was perfectly capable of building such a gigantic rock.
Working with two naval architects on the other side of the world, Tim quickly discovered that the familiar box shape would not fare so well at sea. The flat sides and bottom would give the passengers a very rough and even dangerous ride. Tim built several 6-foot models for some open water testing. One of his models was built to the specifications of a PhD naval architect. The model turned and aligned with the wind, in contrast to the box-like boat that rocked sideways on the waves. He took this discovery and applied it to his proposed model of the Ark. Was this a logical model based on information given in the book of Genesis?
The first question is, what were the conditions like for Noah's Ark? Was it dead calm? Or were there waves, wind, etc.? Well, there's a number of clues in the Bible. The first clue is that Noah had to build something that looked like a ship. It wasn't just any old shape. It looks very ship-like. That 300 by 50 by 30, that's a big clue. That looks like a ship. So we're expecting the water to act pretty normal. It's like the ocean because we're building something that looks like a ship. There's other clues as well. For example, in Genesis 8:1, God sent a wind, and wind creates waves. The Bible doesn't specify a wind-catching feature on the ark, but it does tell you a relatively long hull, and that is not exactly what you would expect. If you were just designing a vessel to float on the water, you wouldn't make it so long. It takes more work to build it long, it takes more wood, and it's more of a danger as it crosses over waves that could break. What makes the most sense is that the vessel was built for comfort as well as strength and capacity and seakeeping. So you have to balance all these factors together. In order to make it comfortable, you want that ark to be running through the waves, not side onto the waves, which it would fall into naturally. There's a number of ways to do that. All you need is any sort of wind obstruction on one end. Could be a sail, could be a building, could be a wooden fin. But I wanted something which was low maintenance. I didn't want sails that they had to look after. So if we just built a wooden fin to catch the wind on one end, and at the other end I wanted something that would catch in the water. And the usual way to do that is to have a thing called a skeg, which acts like a rudder at the back of a ship.
Once Tim had completed his Ark model, he noticed a remarkable resemblance to ancient ship designs.
What I ended up with was something that looked familiar. It looked a little bit like the designs of ancient ships, such as the Greek triremes and more ancient ships. What I noticed in the ancient designs is they had high stems. And a lot of the very ancient ones had high stems on one end and an extended mysterious appendage on the other.
Were the features in these ships leftover technology from Noah's Ark itself? We can't say for sure, but it's possible that the storm weathering design that Tim developed for his Ark is seen on some of the earliest ships.
Historians who've been studying ships have found these appendages at the back of ships. Now, some people have thought that they were prototypes of the Greek ramming bow, but this is at the back, not the front. This stern appendage is called a mystery, if you don't know what it's for. But if you view it as part of a storm-keeping package in conjunction with a high stem at the other end, then it makes perfect sense. So maybe these ancient shipbuilders knew exactly what they were doing. Or maybe they were just copying features from Noah's Ark, which they'd seen their fathers and grandfathers do.
construction of the ark itself. How could such a large wooden boat hold together, especially in rough seas? A recent documentary produced by the BBC scoffs at the idea of a wooden vessel 300 cubits long.
According to Tom Bosmer, an expert on ancient boats, not even 19th century engineers could have built an ark that big out of wood alone. Even 19th century boats had steel frames inside wooden frames.
The problem with a 450-foot boat made of wood is that the wood, as a material, cannot maintain the shape of the boat. And the boat would start to distort at sea, the seams would open up, and it would sink.
It's a safe bet that a wooden ark that size would have sprung hundreds of leaks along the length of its huge hull and sank like a stone.
One of the things that seems to bother people who are against the literal interpretation of Noah's Ark is the scale of the ark. One of the things that they say is you can't build a wooden ship that big. In the same breath, they would usually pick some ships from 100 years ago, maybe the 18th, 19th century sailing vessels, and say, well, they had trouble getting boats longer than 330 feet or so, so therefore it's impossible for ancient people to build Noah's Ark.
An ingenious construction method seen in ancient shipbuilding that used edge-jointed planking puts the BBC's faulty claims to rest.
In this exhibit of the ark under construction, we're treating the planking as exactly the same way as the Greeks did the planks. When Greeks built their ships, the large ships, they used to use multiple layers of planking, and they had this special trick where they had joints in between each plank. And you can see the joint here, they're a tenon, and they fit into a mortise in the adjacent plank, and that locks the two planks together. There's no way they can move, there's no way that they can break a seal and let the water in. This is a very advanced technique. In fact, it wasn't even seen at all in any of the ships built in the last few centuries in Europe and America. We believe this method would allow the ship, the Noah's Ark, to be built without any problems at all with movement of the planks and leaking, which did plague some very large wooden ships. Interestingly, wooden nails, called tree nails or trunnels, are actually a very successful way to join planks to the frame. The reason these work so well is because, first of all, they're nice big diameters, so it doesn't dig into the wood. But what happens is, when water hits the wood expands, seals off the hole, and makes it impossible to remove. Now that's a lot of work. It's too much work for the shipbuilders in 18th, 19th century. They weren't going to bother with that. And that's why their ships used to loosen up. In fact, they used to call the ship a tight ship, because when they first started it was nice and tight. All the joints were held together because they hammered the cotton and they hammered the caulking in between the planks, which made the ship tight. But after a while it became, well, a loose ship. The ancient Greeks, however, had much higher quality in the hull. They built the hull with planks that were mortise and tenon, throughout thousands of mortise and tenon joints. It doesn't take any high technology, it just takes more labour.
I'm sure many people have heard the phrase, thinking outside the box. When we're used to seeing something and someone changes it, for many of us, we just don't like change. And some of us rebel against that. That's why when I've had people come into the Creation Museum and see the slightly different shape of Noah's Ark, it's almost like, this is terrible, this is awful, you can't change what Drs. Morris and Whitcomb did.
We're really just following in their footsteps, developing new ideas based on more information as we research Noah's Ark as a real vessel in real history.
Noah's Ark, real ship or child's plaything? The Bible clearly teaches that it was a real account. But are we correctly teaching this to our children?
One of my pet peeves is opening up children's books and seeing the account of Noah's Ark, Noah's flood, and looking at a picture of Noah's Ark looking like an overloaded bathtub with giraffes sticking out the chimney that will sink at any moment.
It makes sense in a children's room to paint Noah's Ark in a cartoon style. It's friendly and bright and exciting. But there's a dark side, and that is that these children grow up into adults, and on their way, all they can remember is this cartoon picture of the ark.
What happens today is we have whole generations who are growing up in the church and they sort of look on what they taught from the Bible as just a group of stories. Because when they go to public schools, the majority do go to public schools, even from the church, they're taught about dinosaurs, and they're taught about fossils, and they're taught about the Grand Canyon, and they sort of get the idea, oh, what you're taught at school, that's real. But at church, we learn about these Bible stories. And one of these Bible stories is about Noah's Ark. And it was a cute little ark and a cute little bathtub and so on. We need to teach children that Noah's Ark was a real boat, just as the Bible describes it.
Well, another question I'm often asked, how could Noah fit all the species of animals on the ark? Actually, the Bible doesn't say Noah took all the species of animals on the ark. The Bible, first of all, tells us that Noah was to take the land-dwelling air-breathing animals on the ark, not all the animals on earth, just the land animals. And secondly, it doesn't say species, it doesn't use the word species. Can anyone tell me what word it uses? Kind. You see, in Genesis chapter 1, when God created the animals and plants, he says he created them after his kind, after their kind. The implication here is that each kind reproduces its own kind. In your biology classes, you study classification, phylum, class, order. What's the next one? Family, genus, species. The Hebrew word for kind probably equates, in most instances, to what's called the family level of classification. When it comes to dogs, there's only one family of dogs, and they're called dogs. So there's only one kind of dog, and it's called dog. In other words, you'd expect to find dogs reproducing dogs, cats reproducing cats, elephants reproducing elephants. Do you know what the secularists say about domestic dogs, for instance? They say the origin of the domestic dogs from wolves has been established, suggesting a common origin from a single gene pool for all dog populations. Even secularists would say that something like a wolf gave rise eventually to something like that. People say, how could that give rise to that? Is that evolution? No, because evolution really should be more of, adding new information. What we see here is an incredible loss of information. Actually, I want you to understand something here. If you're going to believe in evolution, like reptiles evolved into birds. Reptiles have the information for scales, but don't have information on how to build a feather, which is a very complex structure. So for evolution, you've got to have matter producing information with all the instructions on how to make a feather if a reptile was to evolve into a bird. But it's not just a feather, it's all the other characteristics as well. And so for evolution in the Darwinian sense, you need to see processes where you see new information being added, zillions of bits of new information added. Actually, what we observe is information being lost or rearranged, not information added. Let me help you understand that. We'll use dogs. We don't know how many dogs God made originally, but let's say there were 2 dogs, and they got married and had kids, and they got married and had kids, and they got married and had kids, and eventually we end up with lots of dogs. Okay, in genetics, we have a convention where we label genes with capital letters and small letters, big A, little a, big B, little b. So here's a male and female dog, and imagine something like wolves. Now you get one set of genes from the male, one from the female. Here we have 2 big A's, 2 big B's, 2 big C's. And here are some different combinations. Now as you look at that, I want you to notice something. Because these up here are dogs, this is going to be what? A dog. It's going to look a little different to the parents. You know why? It doesn't have any new information, but you know what it does have? It's got a different combination of information. You see that? It actually has less information than the parents. You know why it's got less information? It no longer has the little A's or the little B's or the little C's. It's actually got less information. This one here, this to me represents something like a poodle. See, if this represents a poodle, when you breed a poodle with a poodle, what are you going to get? Poodle. Pretty sad, but that's it. Right? Could you ever start with poodles on their own and breed back to wolves? And the answer is what? No. But theoretically, could you start with wolves and theoretically, again, get poodles? And the answer would be what?
Yes.
Yes, exactly. Now, understand the account in the Bible concerning Noah's Ark. 2 of every kind was to go on board Noah's Ark. So if dogs are all one family, and there are 2 dogs on Noah's Ark, then when they came off the Ark, eventually they produced more dogs, and you'd end up with a population of dogs, okay? But they're not going to stay together. What's going to happen is they're going to split up and move to different places on the earth, and as they do, because the incredible amount of variability in the genes, eventually you'll end up with distinct groups, even forming different species, and now you're redistributing the information, and you're losing information from certain groups, the opposite of evolution. Who's heard of the term natural selection? Yeah, well, natural selection, we observe natural selection. Darwin was right about natural selection. Who's heard of the term adaptation? Yes, well, adaptation is what's happening here, and speciation, forming different species. See, those terms are used in the secular textbooks to tell students evolution's true. Actually, when you understand natural selection, adaptation, speciation, it's the opposite of Darwinian evolution. It's evidence against evolution, the opposite of what's taught in most of the public school textbooks. Let me help you understand this further. Here are 2 dogs that have an S gene and an L gene. S for short hair, L for long hair. S and L together give a medium hair length dog, okay? So these were the 2 dogs, if you like, on Noah's Ark. So they fall in love and they have offspring. And they have one that inherits an S gene from each of the parents. That one has 2 S genes. It's going to look different to the parents. Does it have different information? Well, it's not new information, it's a new combination of information. But it's going to look a little different because it's got a different combination. And then you might get one that looks like the parents and inherits an S and an L gene. And then there's one other combination. What is that? Al and Al. Oh, it's got something new. Well, it's got a new combination of information, but the information was already there in the parents. It's just a new combination of information. Now, the dogs move towards a cold climate. Those that have short hair and medium hair get cold, and they die. And now you're only left with dogs that have L genes, who on their own will only ever produce dogs with what? L genes. They can never produce short hair or medium hair again. You form a different species of dog. That's a long-haired dog. You get the idea? If they move towards a hot climate, what's going to happen there? Well, those with long hair and medium hair overheat. They die. Now you're only left with dogs with S genes, who on their own will only ever produce dogs with what? S genes. And so over time, through natural selection, adaptation, what happens is you can form all these distinct species of dogs, but they're still 100% dogs, and they came from the original gene pool. Think about this. From a perspective of Darwinian evolution, you supposedly start with matter, no information, and over time, matter has to give rise to zillions of bits of information for all the information to build all the different kinds. So we should see increasing information all the time to build all these different kinds of animals and plants. Actually, what we observe is a loss of information, redistribution of information. It fits exactly with what the Bible would tell us. Actually, when we form different species, they actually have less information overall than the original, which means it's the opposite of evolution. This is evidence against evolution, and yet it's taught as evidence for evolution. And then you start to realize Noah didn't need anywhere near the number of animals on the ark that people think he did. He didn't need all the species of dogs, only 2. He didn't need the African elephants and the Indian elephants and the stegomastodons and the mastodons and the mammoths. He only needed 2 of the elephant kind. And when the elephants came off the ark, again, just like dogs, over time you'll end up with different species forming, but they all come from the original gene pool and the incredible information that God put there in the first place. See how we can have answers? Isn't it easy to understand? Really is. Makes a difference. Helps you understand this. The Bible got it right about biology. Wow. Because it really is the Word of God.
Okay, we can have the lights up here, please. I've lost my stick. Oh, there it is. It doesn't matter. Okay. Just a couple of thoughts that I've had. Any of you ever have a purebred dog? Ever had a purebred dog? The purebred dogs, did your dog have any kind of inbred health issues? Totally. Anybody else? Yeah, so like for instance, we had a corgi, purebred corgi. Very common when the dog gets about 10 years of old, they develop a foot flop. And over a period of several years, he became basically paralyzed in his back, legs, and hips. That's a common problem. We had a Dalmatian. Dalmatians are very prone to deafness. I'm just saying, when again, it's the downward turn of the genes. That's what all that is. So interesting stuff, okay? All right, very